Now we have to finish assembling our form. We have the legs attached, we have our crop rebuilt, we have it on our temporary mounting stand, we took it in the paint booth, we have the legs painted and clear coated over and protected. Now we can finish our form assembly by putting the tail on and the head on. That's one of the advantages of case skinning a turkey versus doing a breast incision. You can lay out the entire form beforehand, disassemble it, and then sew up your bird to see exactly where you're at. We're going to be pushing the tail into our tail slot we cut in during the form prep course. The exact angle of the tail is up to you. Some people like to have their tails angled back a little bit further. Some people like to have them quite a bit more forwards towards the head. I like to have it kind of in a mid-range position to that. So as you're pushing it into place, you just want to look to make sure you're lined up everywhere correctly. You can kind of put a little bit of pressure against the form with your chest to make sure the form doesn't move up or down. It should be all the way seated down. If it seems like you're not seating down correctly, if you're binding up against your foam, you can remove a little bit of foam here. If you're having a hard time pushing your wires into place because this foam is fairly hard, you can pre-drill those holes out with a 7/16 inch drill. Sometimes when turkeys are strutting, they'll have their tail cocked one way or the other, like they're strutting at another turkey. That's a great way to do it too. Most mounts are done straight on like this. It's easier to do them straight on. I would recommend for your first mount to just do it straight on like this. Now we have to determine where we want to put our head. See, our head is painted. If you remember from the form prep course, when we were preparing the head, we had made a number of cuts here. We may end up keeping this much neck. We may end up taking a little bit more neck off. We'll do that after we have our bird sewed onto the form. We don't have to determine that now. As long as you start out with about this much neck, you're fine. We have to determine the exact position on our form we want our head to be put on. I'm going to pull the wire out for this just to make it a little bit easier to illustrate exactly where I'm going to be putting it. You don't want to set your head too low. Putting it here is a little bit too low. Here is still slightly too low, but it would work. Right about here is perfect. You want your major carnicles, which are here, to be in line with the bottom part of your tail, right here. It should be a straight line across. You also don't want your major carnicles going much higher than the shoulders. Your scapular group of feathers is going to be stopping here, and you want them to be almost lining up directly with your major carnicles. So this is the spot we're going to start. We'll put our initial hole in here. After we sew our skin around the form and we resize the head, if we feel that this head position is not correct, we can change it. We can drill another hole or we can move the wire in our head, but we're going to start here. You want to determine the midpoint on your form. There's a couple ways you can do it. You can eyeball it. That's a great way to do it. Sometimes that's the best way to do it. You want it to be lining up with the center of your tail. You can also measure across your form. Normally on a TK42, after you add in the expansion, from shoulder to shoulder measured across the front, or the highest point on your breast expansion area, is going to be 10 to 10.5 inches. So if you would measure from here, swing across to here, it's 10 to 10.5. So you want your attachment point to be right at 5 1/4 if you want to get it exactly centered, which would be right where my thumb is. I'm just going to make a little mark right there. Again, after you drill this in, and if it looks like it's not centered up, eyeball it. That's what people are going to be seeing. We're taking our 1/4 inch drill, and we're going to be drilling down at an angle. Okay. Take our 9-gauge soft wire and just slide it back into the head. Okay, now at this point, I just line it all up. And I like to actually stand back about 3 to 4 feet and just look at everything, just to make sure everything is still lining up straight And I'm going to swing this so you can see where I'm at. Obviously this head's pushed too far forward, but I just want you to see the alignment before we hinge it back. How it's aligned with the tail. It should be straight on. Okay. Now we're going to hinge it back. As we hinge it back, it's going to fall down slightly on the form. That's what you want to see. We're going to keep it about at that to start. Again, I like to stand back 3 to 4 feet and just look at where I'm at. This is a real good position. If we didn't like how this is looking, we can hinge it a little bit more forward like this. We might end up doing that. Again, stand back and take a look at it. You can see that our major carnicles are lining up with our shoulders, and they're almost in a straight line back to the end of our tail. That's what you want to see. It's not set too low on the form, it's not set too high. And we can always adjust for it. There's a good chance that after we put our skin on, I might take a little bit more of this foam off and sink that head in a little bit more. One important thing to note here, I'm not setting this head way back in. You want it to be coming out in front of the breast area. Turkeys never strut with their heads sucked back in where the neck comes out. They'll have their head tipped back in to the cape of feathers and into the hackle. You'll see that all the time. But this part here should always be straight and level with the front part of the breast feathers. Very important. Just take a quick look at it from that angle as well. Everything looks like it's lining up really nicely. Just going to swing it back so you can see it head on one more time where we're at right now. Again, we might have a little bit too much neck here, but that's okay for right now. We can always drop it down a little bit more later. We probably will be. If you wanted to have the head tucked way back into the hackle, I'm just going to swing it around so you can see what I'm talking about. If you wanted this head tipped way back like this, you'd want to keep all this neck here. You'd need it. But normally on my full struts, I like to have it about like this. We do not have to recreate any more of the neck. Normally from the ears of the turkey going up into the form here, it's about 11 to 12 inches on a tom. If you remember from our initial illustration, the neck comes down and then S's up and then into the head for a full strut. That is all hidden within our breast expansion. So we don't have to try to recreate that. We only have to recreate the little bit of neck that comes out of that breast expansion right there. So that's why we're not putting the entire neck on. It's completely unnecessary. And you'll see why it's completely unnecessary as we mount. Everything will just fall right into place, and it's much easier to do it this way. The next step in the process is to put clay at the junctures where the drumstick meets the form. And then we can remove our form from the temporary base and sew the skin around it. First thing I do is I'm going to take the head and the tail off and put these aside in a safe place out of the line of fire. If you recall, we have wire running from what's left of our drumstick bone up and into the form. There's an area here where it's just wire going into the form. That allows us to bend and shape our form in any direction we want, even after the bird is sewed up. But we do need to have some kind of a locking mechanism there, and we're going to use clay. Clay takes a day or two to set up. If we put clay in there now, we can sew our bird up around our form, and then we can still position it yet for the next day as we're working on finishing it. After a day or two, whatever position we leave it in will be locked in place. I get a little bit of water on the clay and I'm just pressing it around that wire, making sure that the clay gets all the way behind it and up onto our bondo and underneath onto the form. And we'll repeat that process on the other side. Now that we have both sides clayed, we can remove our form from the temporary base. We'll just remove our 2 nuts and washers and pull it right off.